Welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast, hosted by Dave Roberts. Humanity possesses a unique skill, the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. This podcast embraces that ability, offering learning opportunities through conversations with extraordinary guests. Dave aims to leave a positive mark on individuals around the world. So before you dive into today's episode, please share this podcast with your network, including friends, family, and colleagues. And please consider leaving a rating or review. Your support makes all the difference.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, and today it is my pleasure to have as my guest Marilyn Raichle. Marilyn is the author of Don't Walk Away, and she grew up in the shadow of Alzheimer's. Her mother, Jean, told her, when we get Alzheimer's, walk away. There is nothing you can do, so live your life and don't sacrifice it for us. Instead, Raichle became transformed, embracing the value and joy of people who are living with, not suffering from dementia. Marilyn Raichle began her career in the performing arts. She founded the Seattle International Children's Festival, introducing children to world culture through the performing arts. In 2007, she received a Master's of Public Administration from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. Upon returning to Seattle, her career was upended when she became the family caregiver for her parents, both of whom were developing dementia. It was a rocky journey, at first reluctant and ultimately joyous. In 2010, inspired by her mother's newfound artistic ability, she founded the Art of Alzheimer's, celebrating the creativity of people living with dementia and the power of the creative arts to enrich and empower their lives. She is now the executive director of Maud's Awards for Innovation in Alzheimer's Care. Marilyn, welcome to the Teaching Journeys podcast. It's an absolute pleasure having you on the program today.
It is a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And we met, you reached out to me, I think it was through just an email, an introductory email that you sent to me regarding your journey. I did my due diligence, did some research, and said, your journey sounded fascinating to me. I responded, and a couple conversations later, here we are. So,
excellent.
Marilyn, my first question for you, and I mentioned in the bio that you grew up in the shadow of Alzheimer's. Can you elaborate and really tell our audience what that experience was like for you?
Well, there were 5 kids in our family, and mother's side of the family was heavily influenced by Scottish Calvinists. And in that journey with dad's family, so many of them developing the disease, it was like a waiting game. Mom taught us from the time we were young that when we get Alzheimer's, it was never if, when we get Alzheimer's, I want you to walk away. We're not going to remember you. There's nothing you can do. And I do not want you to sacrifice your lives for us. So walk away. And we all thought that made sense. Yeah. But from the beginning, it was a very ghoulish family. As teenagers, we developed ways to kill my father when Alzheimer's arrived. Dad even participated. And so it was just this dark family, and the whole idea of Alzheimer's was always treated like a death, actually kind of worse than death, because we just assumed that person would be gone. It was hard for us to think of their lives having value. And so it was just this very dark, and we didn't want to talk about it. It was, except for making these ghoulish jokes. And so it was just this sort of sad as I look back on it. So that's why when Mom told us to walk away, we all agreed that that made perfect sense, that they were living in they had enough money to live in a really good continuing care facility, which I might add, most people don't have.
Yes.
And we just thought, okay. And to this day, I regret so much that when Mom was first developing dementia, I did in fact walk away, that I didn't empathize with her. And I missed that part of the journey. And as I look back on it, it could have made a difference in Mom and Dad's lives. But as it was just this dark, ghoulish vision of what Alzheimer's would be. But then that was our family. It was pretty much emotions were considered an indulgence, and you were tended to walk away from most things that had to do with emotional involvement. At least that was me.
Yeah, and also, I think, as I recall reading your book, compliments, was it not accepted or was just not part of the deal growing up in your home?
Yeah. It was no emotions. And we knew mom and dad loved us because we knew that was their job. That word was never spoken. It was just this sort of emotionally disconnected family.
Yeah. Or like I like to call it, overly distanced from your emotions.
That would be a good way of putting it. And that went on and on and on. So when I started working, that was it. That was like my life revolved around work, not around anything else.
Yeah, that would make sense given the environment you grew up in and given what the norms were in your household.
Yeah. And my older sister escaped that. It was me and my younger brother who got the brunt of it.
I know the focus of your book is your mom, and we're going to talk about your book in detail, but tell our audience who your mom was before Alzheimer's and who she became after and during Alzheimer's.
Well, it's interesting. Mom was this fabulous woman. She was funny and she was competitive and she was curious about everyone and she was helpful and she was a force in her community. She had lots of friends. And who she was essentially was always intact. It was changed. But as mom, I like to regard this as distilled to her essence. And so in her years with Alzheimer's, she changed, but except for the fact that she couldn't bake anymore, she was basically that same funny, curious person. And I have to add, because I've been thinking a lot about her recently, she was also really wise. And her wisdom, she never stopped communicating that to me. And you hear those things about mom became the child and I became the parent. No, mom was always mom. And she was this incredibly wonderful person who changed from her Scottish Calvinist upbringing as her dementia, because we were raised, compliments were an incredibly difficult thing in our family. Because if you accept a compliment, it means you think you deserve it. So in our family, led by mom, if you got a compliment, you should change the subject, preferably to something depressing. And we all got out of the habit because it was so depressing. And yet, whereas mom was living in assisted living with dementia, she was giving a smile and a compliment to everybody. She started all her conversations with compliments. She still couldn't accept one. If you told her she played the piano well, she would hit a wrong note just to prove that you were wrong. If you told her that she was lovely, she would make a hideous face again to prove that you were wrong. But she did start every conversation with a smile and a compliment, which was alien to me. And when I started doing it, I thought, oh my gosh, this makes a world of difference. How you relate to people. Again, she was teaching me. But who mom was, this wonderful, dynamic person, was always there. In fact, her two best friends, Phyllis, who never spoke, ever. She cooed, but she didn't speak. And Kathleen, who was very stern. And mother was in the middle, and she somehow brought them together into this incredibly tight-knit friendship. So she was this lovely person. And I didn't get to know her until we were care partners. In fact, once before she developed dementia, I lived in this big, huge house not far from where she lived. She came over to the house once, and she just came in because everybody was letting people in. And she came up to my room, and I was taking a nap. And she laid down next to me, and she told me she loved me. I just remember crying. I didn't say anything. I just was crying. And she said, I guess I should have said that more often. Again, we never spoke of it. We never said anything because I was pretending to be asleep. But our life together as care partners unlocked all that love that had been waiting so long to express itself. It was, and this is what's odd about my book, is that it's a refreshingly positive, hopeful book about living with dementia, because living with mom, not living with her, but being with her was such a gift to me in so many ways. So yes, she was always essentially the same wonderful person.
Yeah, and in reading your book, it really gives a hopeful message of living with somebody with dementia because there's so many, just depressing stories. I think, as you mentioned about dementia, and and there's a lot of challenges with that, particularly in the later stages when they forget who they are, they forget their history, and that's a source of pain for the surviving family members. And it's obvious that your mom blossomed during her end of life journey.
Yeah.
And did she always paint, or was this something that she just took up when she developed dementia?
It's so odd because in her family, everybody played an instrument. My grandfather wrote poetry. The arts were really important. Mom played the piano constantly. Art was never a part of it. I asked her younger sister once, Louise, I said, did you ever paint? She said, no. She's like, no. So when mom started to paint, it was such a surprise. And yet, throughout all those years of painting, she always denied the fact that she painted. If you said what a beautiful painting was, she said, I didn't do that. It was, and the only time she ever acknowledged a painting as her own is when it was competitive. Once mom and I painted together because they were threatening to stop allowing her to come to the painting class. She was drinking the paint. So I came to the class basically to stop her drinking paint. And so I was painting. And at the end of the class, we looked at both of her paintings and mother said, I like mine. And that was one of two times she actually acknowledged a painting as of her own. Other than that, she didn't paint.
You mentioned in the beginning that she was giving compliments to everybody, where she was at. Was that something that she regularly did prior to dementia, or did this just develop after she got diagnosed?
I don't know if she did. I never remember her giving compliments, but then, I mean, she gave me compliments like, oh, congratulations on your good grades. I mean, she would, yes. So she would give us compliments, but never the way she did when she was living with dementia, with this big smile. And when she was to say to the caregivers who lived there, she would give them a big smile and say how beautiful they looked, what beautiful outfits they were wearing. I mean, it just blossomed out of her. I have to say one thing right at the beginning. I was never a home caregiver. They have the toughest job on the planet, and they're working without a net. Mom was living in a really great place. They called Horizon House. They took care of most of her care. I was there to keep her occupied and to make sure she went to doctor's appointments. I still only saw her once a week at the beginning on painting day. But then my reluctance to do this was always underscored by those words, walk away, walk away. And I was always looking at the clock, walk away. So it was not something I had any desire to do. But the reason I did it is that when I left graduate school, it was during the recession and there were no jobs. So my brothers and sisters said, okay, we're going to pool our resources and we're going to keep you afloat and you're going to be the family caregiver. So both mom and dad were developing dementia, dad from Parkinson's, mom from dementia. And I didn't know anything and I didn't want to know anything and I didn't want to be there, but there I was. It was a job. I was not good at that job, but I was there.
Yeah, you were consistently there, which I'm sure had to be a comfort to your mom too.
Well, you go through that beginning thing where you say, oh, she doesn't remember who I am. But it didn't matter after a while. I realized it didn't matter if she knew who I was. She knew she liked me, and she knew she was happy to see me. And that like this journey was a constant source of lessons. And the first one you mentioned, which is she was living with, not suffering from. And the other was that it was not about me. It was about her. And it's not how I would feel if I had dementia. And it's not about testing as whether you could bring them, quote, back. Like, do you remember or don't you remember? Because they don't. And it only upsets them and upsets you. So you just let go of that. So, but it was just the beginning when I didn't want to be there. And then we sort of arrived, Mom and Dad and I, at this compromise where Mom wanted the best for Dad. She, in fact, thought of herself as Dad's caregiver. He was in a wheelchair at this point. And Dad wanted the best for Mom, and I wanted the best for both of them. So again, we met in the middle and coexisted, and I did the best I could, which was still not good. But it was better than the way it started. And it's interesting that Mom was so funny. Mom was so funny. She would say to Dad, who was in a wheelchair, hop up, hop. And most of the times he wouldn't hop up. Sometimes he would hop up. He fell 22 times in 1 year and didn't break a bone.
Wow.
And the nurses were just furious with her. And they actually suggested to me that Mom live in a different apartment. And they suggested that to Dad. And Dad said, she is a lovely woman. And that was the end of that conversation. And so I once said to Mom, don't tell Dad to hop up. He can't. He's in a wheelchair. And she said, no, he's not. Because all she saw was her lovely, wonderful husband. And they'd been together for 72 years.
Wow.
As best friends and married. So they adored one another. And so it was, again, just when she said, no, he's not. And so I just tried to keep her from having him hop. And once I said to Dad, Dad, please don't hop up. And he said, oh, I'll try.
No guarantees, but he'll try.
No guarantees. Because he wanted to make Mom happy too.
Yeah,
and then she started throwing water on the nurses and the caregivers who were trying to dress and undress her husband. She would actually get water in a glass and pour it on them to keep them from dressing and undressing her husband, which was her job.
Your parents sound delightful.
They were. Dad was not the happiest man, but they adored one another. I've always thought that if I had to choose between your parents loving each other most and also loving their kids, or loving their kids more, and yes, I would choose that they love each other passionately first and most, that because it carried them through.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what we did, they were just fabulous. So lucky Dad, lucky Mom. I'm going to tell you this odd story. I mean, as children, Dad was really, when we were kids, Dad was really unhappy. He hated his job, hated it. And this isn't in the book. And so when he came home, he would start yelling at people. So we'd all run to our safe spaces. So one day when I was 9 years old, when Dad arrived, I went to the hall closet and stayed there until he opened the closet. And then I fell out as if I had hung myself. And he didn't know what to do. He was completely disarmed. We were all safe. And then he went down to the shop where he was working on something. And the family would actually line up to watch me fall out of the hall closet. And in some ways, I think it was a way that Dad felt that even though it was odd, it was that I cared about him, that I was going to this extreme. This is why I developed the comedy festival later on. It was a very odd family. And Dad was, in some way, oddly comforted by the fact that I did that very strange, again, ghoulish thing.
Yeah, it sounds like you had some interesting experiences growing up in your family too.
It was sort of like Harold and Maude.
Yeah, oh, yeah, I remember that. Yeah. I got a good picture now, Marilyn. I got a good picture. Let's talk about your book. I know you mentioned it.
Okay.
Don't Walk Away, A Partner's Care Journey. First of all, if I had the book in front of me, I would just flash it so that everybody can
Okay.
see it. And by the way, thank you for sending me a copy. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I found your mother's drawings just very delightful. Let me,
Mhm.
how did you determine which drawings you wanted to pick for the book? What was your mother's process for choosing what she drew or painted?
Well,
What was that
well, first let me
process for
start
her?
with the painting. So they had a painting class at the facility where she lived, a painting class for people with memory loss. And when dad died, mother was so bored that I took her to this class. And they would put a model on the table. And so the titles of these paintings were all what she was painting, with one exception. So that cover, show the cover again, show that painting, because she was always transforming things. That painting, little, is her picture of pink carnations. She was not necessarily painting what she was seeing, she was painting what she was feeling. And so the art was some of the art, basically the art I just love. And some of it seemed to be apropos to the story I was telling, because I wrote down every single thing mom and I did for 9 years. And so she was painting all this time. And so when she would paint, they would talk about something which mother didn't pay any attention to. And then as soon as the person who was leading the class lifted up her brush and dipped it in paint, mother would begin. And you could tell when she became completely, totally engaged when she started to hum. And then she would just sit and paint. And she was very fast. And about a half an hour later, she would be done. And then they would have her sign it. And then she would leave. And sometimes she would walk around the hallways and she would see this group of people who were sitting at the table painting. And she would be fascinated and say, "May I join you?" And she would want to do it again. But it wasn't the painting that drew her, it was the community of being a part of that group, I felt. But so that's the process. And the humming was great. Once she started to hum, you knew she was not going to pay any attention to anything else. She was just there. She was in the zone. The pictures are just the pictures I loved that are in there. At the beginning, when she saw a flower, she painted a flower. But that quickly changed to the fact that she was then transforming things. And so a zucchini became a dragon. My favorite painting, which has a name, is called the Orange Meanie. And the reason it's called the Orange Meanie is she was painting a butternut squash, and it was this odd pink little jaunty creature. And the face looked exactly like a blue meanie from Yellow Submarine. So I call it the Orange Meanie. So it's over my sink. So every time I do the dishes, I'm there with the Orange Meanie, which makes me very happy. It was so much fun to pick which paintings went with which story. I think it's because, and I'm going to be like mom here. In many ways, they weren't paintings that reflected the story I was telling. They were the paintings that reflected the feeling I had with that story. Same way mom was painting. And my niece, Anna, who is an artist, she said, "I wish I could paint like grandma." The art just flows from her hand to the paper.
Yeah, it's very intuitive.
Yeah, it was just so the paintings are all kind of wonderful. There's only one painting that has a direct connection to the model on the table, and that was strawberries. And that's because mom took us all strawberry picking every single summer. And I think strawberries were such an important part of our family. And so when she painted a strawberry, they were strawberries. And I found that fascinating. And there was one painting, her very last painting. And by this time, mom had sort of lost interest in painting. and just these little odd lines would show up. And then my older sister Jeannie arrived, who is an artist as well. And when we were painting, we all sat at the painting table, and she coached Mom. And the model on the table was a bunch of apples. And Mom started to draw these circles, and Jeannie said, "Oh, look at all those circles. I want to paint some circles." And then Mom got more interested in what she was doing. And for the first time in a really long time, Mom began to hum and started to just paint. And also, for the very first time in my experience with Mom painting, she didn't want to stop. It was really interesting. So, and that's come from a real artist instead of someone who was competing with her. But the art was, and the art is so beautiful. It's so fascinating to watch what she's doing. And it was fascinating to try to figure out what she might have been thinking when she painted that. I couldn't, because it was locked inside this wonderful little brain. But this is interesting. I came up with this idea that Alzheimer's is scary, but art isn't. And as soon as somebody, if you want to talk to somebody about Alzheimer's, I would always show them the art first, because the art is so fascinating. And it completely, effortlessly enables people to sidestep their fear and to be fascinated enough that they want to learn more.
Yep.
And so Alzheimer's is scary, art isn't. The art was, for me, what brought me back to Mom at the Bridget. When she started to paint, I was still in that phase of, okay, I'm going to take her to this class. She's going to paint. Fine. And then I saw the painting, and it was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then when I saw these transformations happen, it was even more fascinating. And so instead of once a week on painting day, I was there a lot. And this was the other great thing that happened, is that I just assumed that Mom was happy to see me, excited to see me, because I was her daughter. And then I realized that Mom had a new family, and that all her companions in assisted living were her new family. And fortunately for me, they were willing to accept me as a member of their family. So I had a new family. I had 6 adopted mothers. And so that family embraced me. Again, that whole aspect of being able to express and receive love, which was kind of alien, it became this natural experience in my life and opened me up to all sorts of emotions and ideas I'd never had before. So I can't tell you how wonderful it was, how peaceful it was. And when you went to assisted living, I would tell people that I would go to assisted living to relax, and they would look at me like I was insane. And yet when I arrived, there were no deadlines. It was just the moment, just the peaceful, wonderful moment. I began to enjoy it so much. I was there every day. It wasn't something that I had to do. It was something that was essential to me. It became this incredible way of understanding the world and a path of personal discovery for me. And so, yeah, it became this wonderful new life. I developed this one thing I did with them. I did this for years. I would start to give them shoulder massages, because touch is something so many people don't have when they're living in memory care. So I would arrive and I would ask everybody if they wanted a shoulder massage, and they wouldn't know what I meant, most of them. But they'd see the person next to them swooning with pleasure, and then they would want one. And sometimes they wouldn't, and that was just fine. And I did this constantly, every day. And then somebody from another table, the men's table, they wanted a shoulder massage. And even the staff wanted a shoulder massage. And it just became this wonderful introduction to my new family every day, except for Mom, who wasn't interested in them. They got in the way of our things that we did, what we liked to do, Mom and me, which included playing Scrabble every single day.
Yeah. But there's so much to be said for community. And a lot of time in those circumstances, our definitions of family does change. There's our DNA family, there's our adopted family, there's our soul family. And it just sounds like it was just from, there were no, everybody was just as in one community. There were no hierarchies, just everybody came together as one.
I tell people this because it's my favorite thing that happened to me when I was there with the shoulder massages. One day, Gloria came up to me and she just had a massage. And she said, "Do you tuck your wings in a handkerchief when you're not here?" It just, every day was smiling. And when I left, we had a routine, Mom. She would give me a big hug and say, "Don't work too hard." And then I'd leave. And one day she walked with me to the elevator with every expectation of leaving with me. And no one was around. Kathleen and Phyllis weren't around, and there were no activities going on. And I didn't know quite what to do, but I couldn't just leave her. And so we started to sing. We started to sing Good Night Ladies. And we walked around and around the hallway singing Good Night Ladies. And when we got to a nurse's station, they would join in. And when we got to one of the people who lived in the building, they would join in. And we went around and around with everybody singing Good Night Ladies. And we finally got back after about 4 turns around the halls. We got back to her apartment and she gave me this big hug and said, "Don't work too hard." Well,
But that's beautiful, though. I mean, just the singing and just getting everybody involved. And people, again, will talk about really the dark side of living with dementia or having somebody with dementia. But these are the great moments, the moments that we could take with us amidst the not so good moments of living with dementia. That is just so great. That's just in terms of how you, that community, your mom just reshaped the whole narrative on dementia.
yeah. And I mean, I don't mean to imply that it's a good thing to get, but
No.
for me, it turned out to be life-changing. I am a much nicer person now than I used to be, much happier. And I'm just so grateful that I had that opportunity. Somebody asked me once, they said, "Well, do you resent your brothers and sisters for not showing up more for you and your mom?" And I said, I wish they could have. I wish they had. They would be so much happier.
Yeah.
But again, you hear it is interesting how deeply committed people are to the dark side of dementia. Yes, and especially for home caregivers, it's hard. But there is also so much joy to be found in these lovely people, and that we forget that people living with dementia are wonderful human beings. And I love this. A friend came up with this: with gifts to give and lives to live. And if we let go of our fear, the opportunity for them to blossom and for us to see who's there is heightened.
Yep.
And I do believe this, that there's so little support for caregivers and there's so little support for people living with dementia, that I believe that until we as a country, as people, believe that people living with dementia are wonderful people who need and deserve our support to thrive and to live with happiness, and to
Mhm.
believe that that's possible.
Mhm.
Until we actually believe that, we're not going to put the resources into their care.
Yep. One of the things you mentioned that was interesting to me in the book, you looked at yourself as a care partner rather than a caregiver.
Yeah.
What is the difference, and how does being a care partner, how can that reshape the end of life narrative?
I remember the exact moment it happened because it was early in the days of Mom painting. And to me, because she had been doing these fabulous, wonderful paintings. And then all of a sudden her paintings started to be the same over and over and over again. Same colors, same lines. And I thought, well, this is interesting. She seems to be losing interest. And so when I took her to the painting class before, we did everything she liked to do. We took a walk, we played Scrabble, we looked at the view, we sang. And then I took her to the painting class, and her paintings completely changed. All of a sudden, these warm animal images came up, the transformations appeared. And that's when I realized I have a role to play in this. We're partners. And instead of this sad woman who needs my support to live, she was this vibrant person whom together we were building a better life for both of us. We were partners. And for me, that's the difference. I mean, so many, and there are lots and lots of caregivers who are doing fabulous work, and my apologies. But if we think of people living with dementia as sad people who need our help to survive, as opposed to, this is a person, a human being. We're both experiencing the same world differently. We're both experiencing the same world, and that we can make life better for both of us if we work together.
Yep.
And that was for me the big breakthrough. That was the moment on when my partnership with Mom, then it was feeding me as I was feeding her.
Yep. And I saw a passage in your book that struck me. I wrote it down, and I wanted to read this because I think this summarizes how you felt as a care partner. I learned to let go of the woman I felt she used to be, embracing instead the wonderful woman who was with me in the moment, not suffering from dementia, but living with it. And, that's, to me, epitomizes being a care partner.
Yeah. And living in the moment is, in fact, one of the names I was going to originally call my book was Living in the Moment with Mom. That it is this, it's so important to just slow down and embrace the moment, to live in the moment. I used to tell people whose parents were just starting this journey. And one person said, my mom's forgetting things. I don't know what to do. And I said, okay, try just this. Take 5 minutes. What's one thing you both like to do or that she really loves to do, and just enjoy it together for 5 minutes. And you will see the person you thought was gone. If you're framing everything in terms of loss and sadness, you will see the person you thought was gone enjoying herself. And the person who is there will blossom. It's a wonderful thing. And then you might want to do it again. And you might want to do it again. It was for me, that was the painting did that for me. It opened up my eyes and my heart and my soul to the person who was still there. And once I became her partner, then it was making me happier as well.
Mhm.
It was, can't tell you the little changes that it just, I mean, to be able to smile and give a compliment to somebody and realize how much that changes the conversation, to share joy with somebody. I once met a man, and he was telling me about his wife who's in a nursing home. And he said, when I see her, she kisses me and she tells me she loves me. And when I look in her eyes, there's nothing there. And I leave in tears. And I thought, why is it that he couldn't see what I most likely would have, which is a woman with something to say? And if your entire framework is fear, sadness, and loss, that's all you're going to see.
Yeah.
And if once you just let that moment, once you share happiness, everything can change.
Yep. That's
Yeah.
how you reframe the experience, and it's how you reframe the narrative.
And then it's so that all that the darkness, I was once being interviewed by somebody, and I was telling these stories about Mom. And then she said, yes, but isn't it awful? I said, well, you would think that. But then I would tell this other story. And I finished that. She said, yes, but isn't it terrible? And it's just sort of like, okay, this person's deep in that this is sad. And I have a friend whose mission is to change the public narrative of dementia from despair to hope.
Yeah, you can't change the narrative from despair to hope if you're awfulizing the experience or
Hmm.
terribilizing the experience. You can't.
Yeah.
You have to, the language has to be in line with, let's see this as a message of hope. And obviously
Yeah.
you and your mom's journey as care partners was as a message of hope, just in terms of her developing her gifts, living with dementia as an artist, leaving something that is going to be forever her legacy at an end of life chapter, which typically is characterized by darkness and characterized by, dread. And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and obviously you were able to demonstrate, your mom was, that there can be some joyful moments. And end of life can be joyful and can be a continued expression of ourselves as human beings. And maybe continued development of awareness of gifts we may never have thought about prior to living with
Yeah.
dementia. So,
Mom made me laugh on her deathbed. I mean, that's not easy to do. She was raised in this Republican banking family during the Depression. They hated Franklin Delano Roosevelt, hated him. And every time she heard his name, she would go, "We didn't like him." And so she's 2 days from death. Her blood sugar had spiked to 600. She was in a coma. And my brother and sister and I were standing around her. We were telling her we loved her. And I mentioned her dislike of the Roosevelt Hotel, and she flinched. Which I couldn't help but laugh, but then I also knew she could hear me and she understood me. So for the next 2 days, I sat next to her and held her hand and talked. So with mom, everything was a gift. Mm. I miss her so much. She died in 2015. And when she died, I went back to assisted living quickly. And Ruby, this wonderful woman from Atlanta, was talking to Evelyn, who was 105, about long. And Ruby held up this red plastic flower and said, "I think about Jean every time I see this. You want to know why?" I said, "Why?" She said, "'Cause she tried to eat it." And and I just started to laugh. And it was just like I was there with these wonderful people enjoying things again. It was just fabulous.
well, and your mom's legacy is going to be left with the members of that community. I bet you I'll be sharing Gene's stories from now until the time that they go on to their next existence. So
Yeah.
thank you for letting us to get to know your mom, and also for your role in that, and also talking about looking at end of life in terms of living with dementia, and also as care partners rather than caregivers. And I want to talk to you a little bit. I want to shift about your work as the
Sure.
executive director of Maud's Awards for Innovation in Alzheimer Care. Tell us about how that developed, and tell us about the mission of Maud's.
Well, again, thanks, Mom. Um, this wonderful man named Richard Ferry, his wife had developed dementia in 2013. And like so many people, he didn't know what to do. He kept reading things and talking to people and trying to find out what could he do to bring joy and happiness into Maud's life. And then he thought, well, perhaps this will work. And he started had this idea for an awards. Every year we give away $100,000 for innovations in Alzheimer's care. And he wanted to see what people were doing and people came up with. And the great thing about Richard is that he didn't want to just learn for himself. He wanted to share that with as many people as possible. So every year we do a handbook of all the innovations, and it's available for free on the website. And we'll also send you a printed copy for free. It's like, these are things that you might find useful and happy in your life.
Mm.
And so it's this terrific program that invites people. It's for anybody in the United States. It can be for organizations. It's $25,000 a year for each for 3 organizations, and $5,000 each to 5 individuals. It can be for-profit, nonprofit. The only thing, it has to be in the continental United States. So it could be the United States and its territories. And so we opened the applications for this year, our 7th year, on March 13th, Friday the 13th. And it will continue. We'll be closing it on May 19th. And it's easy to do. It's not like a grant, which are hard to do. This is an award for something that you have done. And there are 6 questions. And so it's easy. It's at the end, when we have a sort of ceremony and we introduce all the winners, it's so exhilarating to hear what everybody's doing. And this community of people who are building better lives for people living with dementia is growing. Still too small, but it's growing. And we want to expand that. And so it's just this wonderful program. We thank Richard very. Thank you, Maud. And I thank Mom, because I wouldn't have met Richard unless he had been interested in all this art that I was promoting. And then he asked me if I'd be interested, and I said, you bet.
Sounds like a great initiative. How many awards have you given out?
Well, let's see. It's 6 times 8, so 48.
And that's that's helping to spread the word, and also it's going to help a lot of individuals that are living with Alzheimer's, living with dementia. And it sounds like you're doing some impactful work. Thank you for sharing that, Marilyn.
Well, all right. Here's the most exhilarating one. This incredible young woman named Haley Richmond. She was 5 when she started to develop games with her grandmother, who was living with dementia. And when she was about 13, she applied for a Maud's Award. She had created a nonprofit. She had created a nonprofit at the age of 13, and it is currently in every state in the union. And it had 22, it was within 5 countries, and it's probably more now. And last year, she won a Diana Legacy Award and went to London to accept the award from Prince William.
Wow.
I think when she's 21, she'll be running the world.
I think so. I can't remember what the heck I was doing at 13, but it certainly wasn't
No.
going around the UK and, accepting awards from Queen Elizabeth. And boy, that's fabulous. So
Yeah, she's pretty amazing. But then all of these organizations are amazing, and you meet all of these people who are doing great things. So and we have a board that every year reads, each application is read by at least 3 people. Last year we had 190 applications.
Wow.
So we've got that's happening, and I'm very, very happy to be doing that. It's nice as you get older to still be doing something wonderful.
I can't think of a better spokesperson than you, just from your own experiences and just the passion that you have for redefining the narrative on dementia and learning to live with dementia.
Yeah, I think it's my calling now. I want to change people's attitudes so that we will support caregivers. And I use that term encompassing the whole world and the people for whom they are partners and caregivers, building better lives. It's really great. And plus, the book was so much fun, and I discovered so much. And I have to say one thing, that if one's looking for the book, like on Amazon, we have a link on the website, but if they're looking for it, they have to enter the whole title. It turns out there are like lots of books called Don't Walk Away. Who knew? So you have to enter Don't Walk Away, A Care Partner's Journey. Or they can go to the website, don'twalkaway.net.
I also wanted to ask you just about the art of Alzheimer's. I know that was inspired also by your mom's. Is that in any way aligned with what you do with Maud's?
Well, and I wish it were still operative, because it's once I started working for Maud's Awards, I sort of put that to one side. I still have all the art. We did art exhibits. I did one art exhibit called The Artist Within, and it was seen by about 20,000 people in King County and up here. It was just, and it had art by 45 different artists, all living with dementia, aged 60 to 101. And the art was just beautiful. And so everything's related. And I wish that I were still doing the art of Alzheimer's, but I can't do both. But the art was fabulous. And it opened people's eyes and got them past fear. The one response I got over and over and over was, I had no idea. I had no idea.
Is that art still anywhere on display, or do you have it stored somewhere?
I don't have everything stored from all the people who actually, I have images, but I don't have the actual art because I returned it to all of the artists' families. But it was so wonderful when we had one of the exhibits and all of the artists were there. And the pride that they felt as they stood next to their painting was palpable. Again, it was a testament not only to how extraordinary they were, but to what people living with dementia can do.
Yes. It's emphasizing their strengths as opposed to their limitations.
Yeah. Yeah. It was that we don't see that often, but once you see it, oh my gosh, you had no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Marilyn, you left us with so much good stuff today, but I'm going to ask you for one more. Give our audience one ultimate takeaway or teaching you want to leave us with today.
Enduring personhood, that people living with dementia are human beings just like us, and that we share certain things that will never leave us. The need for friendship and the need to be of value, the need to laugh, the need to love and to be loved. We are all human beings. We share those wonderful things, and they need to be nurtured in every person who lives with dementia.
Thank you. And my last question is going to give you a chance to promote yourself a little bit and promote your work. How can individuals find out more about you, Maud's Awards for Innovation in Alzheimer's Care, purchase your book? What's the best way for them to do that?
Well, the easiest way to purchase the book is to go to don'twalkaway.net. And
Okay.
the page on the top has actually a link where you can actually click that to buy it on Amazon or on Barnes & Noble.
Okay.
Easy. And Maud's Awards, if you go to Maud's Awards, and that's spelled Maudes, maudsawards.org, then you get to see Maud and Richard and learn about you can download any of the books. You can find out about the awards for this year and find out more about everything.
And I will make sure all of your contact information gets into the episode notes before we go live. Marilyn, thanks so much for just a wonderful conversation today. Truly enjoyed spending time with you, getting to know your mom, getting to know your work. Thanks again just for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much. You made me so happy.
I'm glad. And with that, that's a wrap on another episode of the Teaching Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Dave Roberts, wishing you peace.